Johnny Carson was midway through his Tonight Show monologue when the phone on his desk suddenly rang. Live on television. It was his 78-year-old mother calling from Nebraska, with something to tell him that would touch not only his heart but the hearts of millions watching. It was Tuesday, December 15th, 1982. The Tonight Show was running smoothly, with Carson delivering his usual opening remarks about President Reagan's economic plans and the upcoming holiday season. The studio audience of 300 laughed at every cue, while nearly 25 million Americans tuned in for another night with their favorite late-night host. Johnny was halfway through a joke about Christmas shopping when something unexpected happened. The red phone on his desk, a long-time stage prop that had never rung during a live broadcast, began ringing with a sharp, persistent tone that interrupted his line. The room went silent. Ed McMahon looked puzzled, and Doc Severinsen and the band stopped mid-note. For a few seconds, Johnny just stared at the phone, unsure if what he was seeing was real. The red phone was supposed to be disconnected, used only as part of his recurring presidential hotline gag. Yet somehow during a live broadcast watched by millions, it was ringing. Johnny looked over at Fred DeCordova, the show's director, who was signaling frantically from behind the cameras. He was just as surprised as everyone else. This wasn't planned, wasn't scripted, and definitely wasn't supposed to happen on live television. The ringing continued. Finally, Johnny decided to answer, a choice that would soon become one of television's most unforgettable moments. "Hello," Johnny said calmly, keeping his trademark composure despite the strange turn of events. "This is The Tonight Show," he added, just as a familiar voice came through the speaker, clear enough for the audience and everyone watching at home to hear. "Johnny, is that really you?" the voice asked. Johnny's face shifted from confusion to recognition, and then to complete surprise. It was his 78-year-old mother, Dorothy Carson, calling from her home in Norfolk, Nebraska. "Mom," Johnny's voice wavered slightly. "Mom, what are you doing calling the show? How did you even get through to this phone?" Dorothy's gentle laugh came through the speakers, instantly recognizable to her son. "Well, Johnny," she said, "I called NBC and told them it was an emergency. They connected me to a number that would reach you directly. I didn't realize it would go live on television until I heard the audience." The studio audience, realizing they were witnessing something entirely unplanned and authentic, began to murmur with excitement. This wasn't a comedy sketch or a surprise celebrity appearance. This was Johnny Carson's real mother calling him during his live show. "Mom," Johnny said, running a hand through his hair, a gesture millions of viewers had never seen before. The usually composed host now looked genuinely flustered. "You can't just call NBC and ask to be connected to The Tonight Show. That's not how it works." "Oh, honey," Dorothy replied, her tone carrying the gentle but firm affection only a mother could express. "Don't you worry about how it works. I told them I was your mother, and that I had something important to tell you, something that couldn't wait until tomorrow." Johnny looked from the audience to the cameras, clearly trying to decide how to handle this unexpected situation. He could have hung up, explained it as a technical glitch, or cut to a commercial, but instead he made a decision that showed a side of him the American public had rarely seen. "All right, Mom," Johnny said, leaning back in his chair with a smile that was different from his usual on-screen grin. This one was sincere, unguarded, and full of affection. "Since you've got about 25 million people listening, what did you want to tell me?" What followed was a conversation no one in the studio, or watching at home, would ever forget. Dorothy Carson, completely calm despite speaking to her son in front of a national audience, spoke with the honesty and warmth only a parent could. "Well, Johnny," she began, "your father and I watched the show last week when you talked about your childhood in Nebraska, and I just want you to know how proud we are of you." At first, the audience assumed this was a setup for a joke or a planned skit, but soon it became clear that this moment was entirely genuine and deeply personal. "Mom, you tell me that all the time," Johnny replied, though his tone hinted that this conversation felt different from their usual talks. "I know I do, sweetheart," Dorothy continued, "but I wanted to say it on television because I want everyone to know what kind of son you really are. Not Johnny Carson the entertainer, but Johnny Carson the person." Johnny's famous composure began to falter slightly. "Mom, I don't think America needs to hear about my personal life." "Well, I think they do," Dorothy answered, her voice firm in that familiar way mothers everywhere would recognize. "Because you make people laugh every night, But they never hear about all the kind things you do when the cameras aren't on. What Dorothy said next caught everyone off guard, including Johnny himself. She began sharing things about her son that he had kept private for years. Dorothy began sharing details that few people had ever heard about her son. She spoke of his anonymous donations to children's hospitals, his quiet support of struggling comedians, and his visits to veteran centers, visits he had specifically requested remain out of the public eye. Just last month, Dorothy continued, you flew back to Nebraska to surprise Mrs. Henderson next door after her husband passed away. You sat with her in the kitchen for 2 hours drinking coffee and listening as she talked about Harold. She didn't even know you were famous, only that you were the kind young man who grew up next door. Johnny's face turned red, and he looked noticeably uneasy. Mom, people don't need to hear about that, he said softly. But Dorothy went on undeterred. And when little Tommy Patterson down the street got sick, she said, you paid for his medical treatments but told the family it came from an anonymous donor. Tommy's mother called me in tears, wanting to thank whoever had helped them. I had to stop myself from telling her it was you. The audience sat in silence, listening intently. This was no longer light entertainment. It was a rare, personal look at a man who had spent decades making others laugh while keeping his own generosity out of view. Mom, Johnny said quietly, why are you telling people all this? Dorothy's tone softened. When she spoke again, there was a weight in her words that made everyone understand this conversation was about more than simple pride. Because, Johnny, she said, I'm 78 years old. I went to the doctor last week and he told me some things I've had to think about. The words hung heavily in the air. Johnny's expression changed, and for the first time in his career, he seemed completely lost for words on live television. What kind of things, Mom? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The kind of things that make a mother want her son to know how proud she is of him, before it's too late to say it, Dorothy replied. And the kind of things that make her want the world to see what a good man her son truly is. Not just what a funny man he appears to be. Johnny Carson, the host who had calmly faced unpredictable guests, technical mishaps, and countless live show challenges, could no longer hold back his emotions. Tears began streaming down his face as he clutched the phone, his voice trembling as he spoke. Mom, are you trying to tell me that you're sick? He asked. I'm trying to tell you that I love you, Johnny, she said gently. Dorothy continued softly. And every night when I watch your show, I don't just see Johnny Carson, the famous entertainer. I see the little boy who used to put on puppet shows in our living room to cheer me up when I was having a bad day. The studio audience was in tears. Ed McMahon wiped his eyes, and even the camera crew struggled to keep steady. Across America, 25 million viewers were witnessing one of the most sincere moments ever shown on television. I love you too, Mom, Johnny managed to say through his tears. And I'm coming to see you this weekend, all right? We'll sit in the kitchen, drink coffee, and talk about everything. I'd like that very much, sweetheart, Dorothy replied warmly. But right now you've got a show to finish. These nice people came to see you be funny, not to watch you cry over your mother. Somehow Johnny gathered himself enough to continue. He wiped his face, took a deep breath, and turned back to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice still heavy with emotion, I apologize for that interruption, but as you just heard, my mother had something important to tell me, and apparently she decided that 25 million people needed to hear it too. The audience broke into applause, not the usual laughter or cheers, but the kind of heartfelt applause people give when they've witnessed something truly meaningful. Johnny continued, I also want to say this, Graz, if any of you still have your mothers, call them tomorrow. Don't wait for them to call you on live television to tell them you love them. That episode quickly became legendary. NBC was flooded with calls from viewers expressing their support for Johnny and their concern for his mother. Letters poured in from people, sharing their own stories about reconnecting with their parents. But the most important call Johnny received came the next morning, and from Dorothy herself. Johnny, she said when he picked up, I hope you weren't upset about last night. I didn't mean to embarrass you on television. Mom, Johnny replied, that was the most important conversation I've ever had on The Tonight Show. I just wish we didn't have to have it because you're sick. Well, Dorothy said in her practical way, we all get sick eventually. The important thing is that I got to tell you what I needed to say while I still could. Dorothy Carson lived for another 2 years after that call. True to his word, Johnny visited her often. Every time he returned to Nebraska, he stopped by Mrs. Henderson's home and greeted the neighbors his mother had spoken of, continuing the quiet kindness she had revealed to the nation that night. When Dorothy passed away in 1984, Johnny took 2 weeks off from The Tonight Show, his first unplanned break in over a decade. When he returned, he dedicated his entire opening monologue to her, ending with a simple line that moved millions. She taught me that making people laugh is a gift, but making people feel loved is a responsibility. The red phone Dorothy had used to reach him that night was never used, again as a prop. Johnny had it removed from the set and placed in his dressing room as a personal reminder of the moment his mother and America reminded him what truly mattered. Years later, when asked about the most memorable moment of his career, Johnny always mentioned that phone call. "I spent 30 years trying to perfect my timing on that show," he would say. "But the most perfect timing of all belonged to my mother, who knew exactly when to call and remind me that being a good son is more important than being a good entertainer." The night Dorothy Carson called The Tonight Show became more than just an unforgettable television moment. It became a reminder to millions of families about the importance of expressing love while there's still time. Johnny Carson had spent decades making America laugh, but that night his mother made them cry, and in doing so, gave them something far more valuable than entertainment, a reminder to tell the people they love how they feel before it's too late. Today, when people recall the most authentic moments in television history, Dorothy Carson's call is always among them. It was the moment when the wall between performer and audience vanished, revealing the human being behind the celebrity smile. Johnny Carson spent his life giving America laughter, but on that December night, his mother gave America something even greater, a timeless reminder that behind every public figure is a person with family, feelings, and the same need for love and connection we all share. The phone call lasted less than 10 minutes, but its impact endured for a lifetime. It proved that sometimes the most powerful television happens not when everything follows the script, but when real life interrupts and reminds us all what truly matters. If this true story of a mother's love and the power of speaking from the heart inspired you, make sure to subscribe for more remarkable real-life stories where genuine moments created television magic. Share this video with someone you love, and tell them how you feel today.